The coastline of southern China should have been safe. Instead, entire villages emptied overnight. And the emperor of the largest nation on earth was quietly writing checks to the men who terrified his people. That emperor ruled from the Forbidden City, commanding an empire of over 100 million subjects. Yet along the shores of Fujian province, his authority meant nothing. Ships flying no flag, but their own controlled the trade routes, decided who could fish, who could sail, and who paid the price for defiance. This is the story of how pirates didn't just rob an empire. They cornered it. The year was the early 1600s. The Ming Dynasty, one of history's mightiest empires, was already cracking at the edges. Corruption spread through its bureaucracy like rot through timber. Its navy, once the pride of the world under the legendary voyages of Zheng centuries earlier, had been left to rust in harbor. Ships sat unrepaired. Sailors went unpaid. And into that vacuum sailed a man who would turn weakness into fortune. His name was Zhilong. Born into a modest family near Quanzhou, Zheng didn't start as a warlord. He started as a translator, a merchant, a man who understood something the Ming court didn't. The real power in the region wasn't in the palace. It was on the water. Picture a young Zhilong standing on a merchant deck off the coast of Macau, watching Portuguese traders unload silver, Dutch captains barking orders in a language he'd taught himself to speak, Japanese smugglers slipping past customs officials who looked the other way for the right price. He wasn't just watching a trade network. He was studying a weapon. Within a few short years, Zheng assembled his own fleet. Not a ragtag band of outlaws, but a disciplined maritime force armed with cannons purchased from European traders and manned by sailors who owed him loyalty rather than the crown. His ships didn't just raid. They taxed. Merchant vessels moving through the Taiwan Strait had two options: pay Zhilong's fleet for safe passage, or lose their cargo, their ship, sometimes their lives. Word spread fast. Soon, paying the pirate wasn't seen as extortion. It was seen as the price of doing business. By the late 1620s, Zhilong commanded a force some historians estimate at over 1,000 ships. Let that sink in. The Ming Dynasty's own navy couldn't field a fraction of that number. An unemployed translator from a fishing town had built a private navy larger than the emperor's, and then came the twist nobody in the Forbidden City saw coming. The Ming government, desperate and humiliated, decided it couldn't defeat Zhilong. So it tried something almost unthinkable. It offered him a deal. In 1628, imperial officials extended an offer of amnesty, along with an official title. Zhilong would become a legitimate Ming naval commander. In exchange, he would use his fleet to fight rival pirates and protect the coastline he once terrorized. It sounds like surrender dressed up as strategy. And in many ways, it was exactly that. Zheng accepted, but on his terms. He kept his ships. He kept his loyal captains. He kept control of the trade routes he'd spent years seizing. The only thing that changed was his title. The pirate had become the protector, and the empire now depended on the very man it once hunted. But here is where the story turns from clever to almost unbelievable. Merchant ships sailing the South China Sea soon discovered they needed more than an imperial permit to travel safely. They needed a flag bearing Zhilong's personal insignia. Vessels that paid him a fee, sometimes described as a kind of tribute, sailed under his protection. Vessels that didn't found themselves at the mercy of the pirates he had once commanded, and conveniently still seemed to influence. Whether Zheng directly orchestrated attacks on ships that refused to pay is still debated among historians. Some argue he ran an efficient protection racket disguised as legitimate customs enforcement. Others believe his former pirate networks simply preyed on unprotected ships out of habit and opportunity, with Zheng profiting either way. What isn't disputed is the outcome. The Ming court, the government of one of the largest empires on earth, was funding a fleet it did not fully control. To protect trade from dangers that fleet may have helped create, imagine merchants in coastal towns whispering the same warning to every new captain: pay the fee or pray. Zhilong grew wealthier than most nobles in the capital. His personal fortune, drawn from trade fees, tribute payments, and control over the Taiwan Strait, made him one of the richest men in East Asia. He built alliances with the Dutch East India Company. He negotiated directly with Japanese officials. A man born a commoner now operated with more international influence than many Ming governors, but power built on a crumbling empire is never permanent. By the 1640s, the Ming Dynasty was collapsing under rebellion and invasion. The Manchu armies of the emerging Qing dynasty swept south, and Zhilong, ever the pragmatist, made a decision that would define his legacy far more than his pirate fleet ever had. He surrendered to the Qing. It seemed, again, like a shrewd move. Switch allegiance, preserve his fortune, survive the transition of power the way he'd survived everything else. He was wrong. The Qing court had no interest in sharing power with a man who had built an empire of his own on the water. Zhilong was detained, and years later executed. The pirate who had outmaneuvered an emperor could not outmaneuver an empire determined to erase every rival to its authority. But his story didn't end with his death. It transformed. His son, a young man raised watching his father command fleets and negotiate with foreign powers, refused to accept the Qing conquest. Known to history by the name Koxinga, he rallied the remnants of his father's naval network into a resistance force. He didn't just inherit ships. He inherited an entire philosophy. The sea belongs to whoever is strong enough to hold it. Koxinga would go on to drive Dutch colonial forces out of Taiwan in 1662, establishing a base that would resist Qing authority for decades. The pirate fleet that once forced an empire to pay for peace evolved into a resistance movement that shaped the future of an entire island. Here is the irony that outlives every ship, every cannon, every ransom paid. The Ming Dynasty believed it was buying loyalty when it gave Zhilong his title. In reality, it was legitimizing a private empire built on fear, one that would eventually outlast the very government that created it. Historians still argue over how to label Zhilong: pirate, merchant, naval commander, warlord. Perhaps the most accurate answer is that he was all of them. Depending on which side of his fleet you were standing on, what remains undeniable is this. For a brief, extraordinary period, one of history's most powerful empires didn't defeat its enemy on the water. It paid him. And in doing so, it planted the seeds of a resistance that would challenge imperial authority for generations to come. The coastline that once emptied in terror eventually became the foundation of a new political order. Built not by an emperor, but by the son of a pirate the empire could never fully control.